What if I told you that a single aircraft modification changed the entire course of the Pacific War? That a maverick engineer with a wrench and a handful of salvaged machine guns turned America's most vulnerable bombers into flying destroyers that could shred entire enemy convoys in minutes. On March 3, 1943, in the waters of the Bismarck Sea, the Japanese Imperial Navy faced something they had never encountered before, and something they were utterly unprepared to handle. It wasn't a new secret weapon or advanced technology. It was something far more dangerous. American ingenuity turned deadly. Today, we're diving into the story of how the North American B-25 Mitchell bomber went from being fish in a barrel for Japanese fighters to becoming the most feared anti-shipping weapon in the Pacific theater. This is the story of 8 machine guns mounted in an aircraft's nose and how they literally changed the tide of war. The B-25 Mitchell bomber first took flight on August 19, 1940, named after General William "Billy" Mitchell, the controversial prophet of air power. Built by North American Aviation, it was designed as a medium bomber capable of carrying 3,000 pounds of bombs at 328 miles per hour. With 6 50 caliber machine guns for defense, it seemed like a capable aircraft for its intended role. But by early 1943, the B-25 had earned a darker reputation in the Pacific theater. American bomber crews had a grimly accurate nickname for their medium-altitude bombing missions: suicide runs. Flying at 10,000 to 12,000 feet, the Mitchell's intended operational altitude placed these aircraft squarely in the killing zone of both Japanese anti-aircraft guns and the dreaded Zero fighters. The mathematics of survival were brutal. Without long-range fighter escort, bomber formations often lost a third of their aircraft in a single mission. Even when they reached their targets, the results were devastatingly poor. Hitting a moving ship from 2 miles up was like trying to thread a needle while riding a roller coaster. The Japanese had learned to simply maneuver their vessels when bombs were falling. Watching American ordnance splash harmlessly into the ocean, something had to change, or the United States would lose the Pacific War through sheer attrition. The transformation of the B-25 began not in some sterile engineering facility, but in the sweltering heat of an Australian airfield in 1942. The man who would revolutionize aerial warfare was Paul Irving "Pappy" Gunn, a gruff 43-year-old who looked more like a mechanic than a military visionary. Gunn's journey to this moment had been extraordinary. Born in Arkansas in 1899, he'd served 20 years as an enlisted naval aviation pilot, one of the rare flying chiefs who earned their wings through grit rather than officer training. He'd flown from America's first aircraft carriers, including the USS Langley, and had started Philippine Airlines before the war broke out. When the Japanese invaded the Philippines, Gunn's world collapsed. His wife and 4 children were captured and imprisoned in the Santo Tomas internment camp in Manila. Escaping to Australia in one of his airline's Red Beach 18s, Gunn was consumed by 2 driving forces, getting his family back and making the Japanese pay. General George Kenny, the new commander of the 5th Air Force, found Gunn in August 1942 doing something that technically qualified as theft. Using machine guns salvaged from crashed P-39 and P-40 fighters, Gunn was installing 4 50 caliber guns in the nose of A-20 Havoc light bombers. Most officers would have court-martialed him. Kenny promoted him. The reason was simple: Gunn's modified A-20s worked. In their first combat test at Buna Airfield on September 12, 1942, these strafers tore through Japanese positions with devastating effect. Flying at treetop level, they could deliver precise, concentrated firepower that no conventional bomber could match. But Gunn wasn't satisfied. The A-20s had limited range and bomb capacity. He wanted something bigger, tougher, and more versatile. He wanted the B-25 Mitchell. The conventional wisdom of aerial warfare in 1942 was built around altitude. Bombers were supposed to fly high, drop their ordnance from a safe distance, and rely on numbers to achieve hits. This doctrine worked reasonably well against fixed targets like factories and cities, but it was proving useless against the nimble warships of the Imperial Japanese Navy. Gunn challenged this fundamental assumption. Working with North American Aviation representative Jack Fox, he began experimenting with a radical concept: turning the B-25 into a low-level attack aircraft that could fight its way to the target and devastate it at point-blank range. The first challenge was firepower. The standard B-25 had a glass nose for the bombardier, equipped with a single 30 caliber machine gun. what pilots derisively called a pea shooter. Gunn ripped out the entire bombardier compartment and installed 450 caliber machine guns, creating a solid metal nose that could deliver 1,600 rounds per minute of devastating firepower. But 4 guns weren't enough for Gunn's vision. He added 2 more 50 caliber guns to external pods mounted on the fuselage sides, then convinced pilots to lock their dorsal turrets in the forward position, adding 2 more guns to the total. The result was a flying gun platform with 8 forward-firing machine guns, more firepower than 3 P-51 Mustang fighters combined. The second innovation was tactical: skip bombing. Instead of dropping bombs from high altitude and hoping for the best, Gunn's B-25s would approach their targets at wave-top height, sometimes as low as 50 feet above the water. They would release their bombs with a delayed fuse from about 300 yards away, allowing the bombs to skip across the water like stones before slamming into the sides of enemy ships. This technique required exquisite timing and nerves of steel. Pilots had to fly straight and level directly at heavily armed warships through walls of anti-aircraft fire, trusting that their forward-firing guns could suppress enough enemy gunners to let them survive the approach. The transformation wasn't just technical, it was psychological. These modified B-25s weren't bombers anymore. They were commerce destroyers, designed to hunt down and annihilate Japanese shipping with the ruthless efficiency of aerial submarines. By early 1943, the 5th Air Force had perfected Gunn's innovations. The modified B-25s worked in coordinated formations. First, conventional bombers would attack from medium altitude to disperse the enemy ships and draw anti-aircraft fire upward. Then Royal Australian Air Force Beaufighters would sweep in low to strafe the ship's gun crews with cannon fire. Finally, Gunn's Strafer B-25s would race in at mast height, their 8 machine guns blazing, to deliver the killing blow with skip bombs. The tactics were revolutionary because they solved multiple problems simultaneously. The forward-firing guns weren't just for show, they served a crucial tactical purpose. By concentrating massive firepower on the target's superstructure during the approach, the strafers could kill or suppress the enemy's anti-aircraft gunners, dramatically improving their own survival odds. The low-level approach also solved the accuracy problem that had plagued high-altitude bombing. Instead of dropping bombs from 2 miles up and hoping physics would guide them to the target, skip bombing allowed for precision strikes at ranges where missing was nearly impossible. Perhaps most importantly, the modified B-25s retained their bombing capability while gaining the ability to strafe. After devastating a ship's defenses with machine gun fire, they could deliver up to 3,000 pounds of bombs directly into the target's vitals. It was like combining a fighter's agility with a bomber's payload. The results spoke for themselves. In training exercises against the wreck of an old ship on the reef outside Port Moresby, Gunn's pilots achieved hit rates that were simply impossible with conventional bombing. General Kenny watched one practice session and declared, "They didn't miss. It was pretty shooting and pretty skip bombing." Word of the modifications spread quickly through the Pacific Theater. North American aviation began incorporating variations of Gunn's innovations into their factory production, creating official strafer versions like the B-25G with its 75mm cannon and the B-25H with an even heavier gun armament. The most heavily armed variant, some versions of the B-25J, carried up to 18 forward-firing machine guns, enough firepower to shred a destroyer. The transformation wasn't without controversy. Many senior officers argued that bombers shouldn't be used like fighters and that low-level tactics were too dangerous. The 75mm cannon mounted on later models proved problematic. Its massive recoil made aircraft nearly uncontrollable, and many crews replaced it with additional machine guns. Critics questioned whether tactical gains justified strategic costs. Every converted strafer was one less bomber for attacks on airfields and supply depots. But the most profound criticism was philosophical. The strafer B-25s represented brutal, intimate warfare where pilots could see their targets, a far cry from sanitized high-altitude bombing. The Japanese understood the threat. Radio intercepts revealed specific orders to target strafer B-25s above all other aircraft, recognizing them as fundamental threats to their shipping lanes. The ultimate test of Gunn's innovations came on March 3, 1943, in the Battle of the Bismarck Sea. A Japanese convoy of 8 transports and 8 destroyers was attempting to reinforce their garrison at Lae, New Guinea, with nearly 7,000 troops. For Japan, This convoy represented their last realistic chance to regain the offensive in the Southwest Pacific. The battle began conventionally enough. 16 B-17 flying fortresses attacked from 7,000 feet, dispersing the convoy and drawing the attention of Japanese fighters. Then 13 Australian Beaufighters swept in at low level to strafe the ship's gun crews, but it was the arrival of 10 modified B-25s, led by Major Ed Larner, that turned the battle into a massacre. Flying at mast height through walls of anti-aircraft fire, the strafer B-25s unleashed a coordinated fury unlike anything the Japanese had ever experienced. Their 8 forward-firing machine guns swept the decks of enemy ships, killing gun crews and setting fires, while skip bombs slammed into hulls with devastating precision. The destruction was absolute. Within 15 minutes, 3 enemy vessels were on fire and sinking. By the end of the 3-day battle, all 8 Japanese transports and 4 of the 8 destroyers lay at the bottom of the Bismarck Sea. Of the 6,900 troops who had sailed from Rabaul, only about 2,200 made it to their destination. The rest were dead, drowned, or wounded. Allied losses were minimal: 13 men killed and 12 wounded, with 4 aircraft shot down. The cost-exchange ratio was so lopsided that it fundamentally altered Japanese strategy in the Pacific. Never again would they attempt a large-scale daylight reinforcement convoy to New Guinea. But the true impact of the battle went far beyond the immediate tactical victory. The B-25 strafers had proven that aircraft could devastate naval forces without requiring aircraft carriers or torpedo bombers. They had turned the Mitchell from a vulnerable medium bomber into the most feared anti-shipping weapon in the Pacific theater. Paul "Pappy" Gunn, the Arkansas-born mechanic who had started this revolution with salvaged machine guns and Arkansas ingenuity, was eventually promoted to full colonel. He continued to fly combat missions throughout the war, more than any other man, and his family was eventually liberated from Japanese internment camps. He died in 1957 when his plane crashed during a storm in the Philippines, but his legacy lived on in every B-25 that carried guns instead of a bombardier. The 8-gun nose that Gunn had improvised in an Australian hangar became the standard configuration for thousands of B-25s. These aircraft went on to devastate Japanese shipping throughout the Pacific, from the Solomon Islands to the Philippines to Okinawa. They proved that sometimes the most revolutionary weapons aren't created in research laboratories, but in the hands of determined individuals who refuse to accept that things can't be done differently. The ripple effects of Gunn's innovation extended far beyond the Bismarck Sea. By late 1943, modified B-25s were prowling the entire Pacific theater like aerial wolves, hunting down Japanese convoys with ruthless efficiency. The psychological impact on enemy morale was profound. Japanese naval commanders began to fear daylight operations in areas where Allied air cover was present. The success of the Strafer program also validated a new philosophy of air power. Rather than relying solely on strategic bombing of distant targets, the Pacific War demonstrated that tactical aircraft could achieve strategic effects by severing enemy supply lines. Every Japanese transport sent to the bottom meant thousands of troops who would never reach their destinations, along with tanks, artillery, ammunition, and food that would never support enemy operations. The technical evolution continued throughout the war. Factory-built B-25J models incorporated many of Gunn's field modifications, including the solid nose configuration with 8 50 caliber machine guns. Some variants carried even more firepower, the ultimate expression being aircraft with 18 forward-firing guns, creating a wall of lead that could literally soar through enemy vessels. The pilots who flew these missions became legends. Men like Major Ed Larner and Captain John "Jock" Hennebrey developed new tactics, coordinating attacks with split-second timing to maximize destruction while minimizing losses. The Japanese desperately tried countering the Strafer threat by sailing only at night, dispersing ships and concentrating fighter coverage. But the fundamental problem remained. Once modified, B-25s appeared over a convoy. Destruction favored the attackers. Gunn continued pushing boundaries, experimenting with 75mm cannons and specialized ammunition. His Australian workshop became a laboratory where mechanics and pilots collaborated to solve tactical problems in real time. The broader implications for military doctrine were revolutionary. The success of the B-25 strafers helped establish the principle that air power could be decisive in maritime warfare without requiring aircraft carriers. This lesson would prove crucial in later conflicts, from Korea to Vietnam to the modern era, where precision air-to-surface weapons continue to dominate naval operations. The human cost of this innovation was significant. Flying strafer missions required extraordinary courage, as pilots had to approach heavily defended targets at suicidally low altitudes. Many crews didn't survive their tours, and those who did often carried the psychological scars of intense close-quarters combat. The intimacy of low-level attack, where pilots could see individual enemy soldiers, created a different kind of warfare than the abstract destruction of high-altitude bombing. For Gunn, personally, the war represented both triumph and tragedy. His innovations helped turn the tide in the Pacific, earning him promotion to colonel and numerous decorations, including the Distinguished Flying Cross and Silver Star. But the personal cost was enormous. Years separated from his family, countless friends lost in combat, and the constant stress of innovation under fire. The liberation of his family from Japanese internment camps in 1945 provided some measure of personal vindication. His wife Polly and their 4 children had survived 3.5 years of captivity, sustained partly by the hope that Paul's work was contributing to their eventual freedom. When they were finally reunited, it marked not just a personal victory, but a symbol of the human spirit's resilience. The post-war period saw Gunn's innovations become standard throughout the aviation industry. North American Aviation hired him as a consultant, incorporating his design philosophy into new aircraft. The principle of concentrated forward-firing armament would later influence the development of attack aircraft like the A-10 Thunderbolt II, which carries a 30mm cannon that traces its conceptual lineage back to Gunn's first machine gun installation in an A-20 nose. The story of the B-25 gunship reminds us that in war, as in life, innovation often comes from the most unexpected places. A former enlisted sailor with a wrench and an unshakable belief that bombers could fight like fighters changed the course of World War II. When the Japanese faced those 8 machine guns blazing from a B-25's nose, they weren't just confronting a new weapon, they were witnessing the deadly creativity of American democracy at war. The legacy lives on in every precision strike aircraft, every close air support mission, and every tactical innovation that challenges conventional wisdom. Gunn's revolution proved that sometimes the most profound changes come not from grand strategies or advanced technology, but from individuals willing to see problems differently and act on their vision with determination and skill. The day Japan faced the B-25's 8-gun nose, they realized that their enemy wasn't just building better planes, they were reinventing the very nature of aerial warfare. And in the end, that innovation proved as decisive as any battle fleet or strategic bomb. It was the day a mechanic's dream became the enemy's nightmare, and the tide of the Pacific War shifted forever, one machine gun at a time.